Well, thank you, Percy, and howdy, football fans. The 1992 pigskin season is beginning to wind down, and there's still the chance that that little upset bug is still in business. The little rascal has done more damage to this year's pigskin crop than the boll weevil did during the Depression. I can't remember a season when no one was safe from that little varmint, and you can bet that I'll do my best to find a vaccine that'll control him before next year. As they say down at the fire hall, no matter how hard we spray, there's always a hot spot to cause trouble later on. So the only thing to do is keep on spraying. We'll look at this week's losers after these words from dear old Dad. Clemson versus South Carolina. Sparky Woods and his Dominickers have been laying stronger eggs of late and have every intention of causing a high pigskin cholesterol count in the big bad felines on Saturday in Death Valley. But it's doubtful if they can shut down all the arteries in this orange pride. Leonard's loser in a close one, South Carolina. Virginia Tech versus Virginia. The Southern gentlemen from Charlottesville will be looking for an early Thanksgiving dinner when they get to Turkey Corners this weekend. But they'll find Frank Beamer's gobblers hard to swallow and difficult to digest. Leonard's loser, Virginia Tech. Tennessee versus Kentucky. The Lexington felines make their final pigskin journey of the season to Knoxville Shooting Gallery run by Johnny Majors, and more than likely they'll be used as targets by the resident riflemen. It's been a long road for the Big Blue, and I know that Bill Curry is glad it's over so that he can get ready for next year. Leonard's loser, Kentucky. Vandy versus Florida. The giant water lizards swim up the Cumberland River to the Nashville dry dock used by Jerry Donato and his sailors, and they'll find a whole lot of shaking going on when they climb aboard. The Cumberland cruiser is fully loaded and ready for action, so Steve Spurrier had better have his gators ready or he'll get his Crocs knocked off. Leonard's loser, Vandy. North Carolina State versus Wake Forest. Bill Dooley has had a great season so far and would like nothing better than to say farewell to Deacon football with a big win over the Wolfpack. But I'm afraid he'll find out that a finish like that only happens in Hollywood, and this confrontation will be played in Raleigh. Leonard's loser, Wake Forest. Penn State versus Pittsburgh. Paul Hackett and his Panthers have had several dark days this year, and I have an idea that the sun will be in total pigskin eclipse when his Cats get to Joe Paterno's Happy Valley. The Lions have had their share of misfortune this season, but they won't have any more this weekend. Leonard's loser, Pittsburgh. Army versus Boston College. The Chestnut Hill Eagles will fly into the bastion along the Hudson to test out the strength of our defense system. And I'm afraid that they'll find out that we've done cut back too far on our Big D budget. Fortunately, we're not talking about our national defense. Leonard's loser, Army. Syracuse versus Miami. The Hurricanes blew all the feathers out of the Owl's roost in Philadelphia last weekend and will move up the coast to check out the strength of an orange teepee in upper New York. And I'm sure they'll find considerably more resistance than they did at the Temple. An upset is always possible, but not probable. Leonard's loser, Syracuse. Ohio State versus Michigan. The Ann Arbor Rodents will be in Nutville Saturday afternoon to check out this year's crop of hard shells in John Cooper's Columbus shed, and I think they'll be surprised at the size of his nuts. The Crimson Buckeyes will be hard to crack, and it's just possible that they won't, but don't bet the family jewels on that possibility. Leonard's loser, Ohio State. Colorado versus Iowa State. The Crimson Twisters from Ames will blow into Bill McCartney's Boulder pasture hoping to stampede his herd to the four winds. But I'm afraid there won't be enough velocity in this cyclone to move the Buffaloes very far. Leonard's loser, Iowa State. Baylor versus Texas. John Makovic and his Austin Bulls will go bear hunting in Waco this Saturday, and there's a chance that they'll find more Bruins that they can handle. Grant Taft will be teeing it up for the last time, and you know the pigskin gods won't let him down while he sings his swan song. Leonard's loser in an upset, Texas. I'll be back after this message. Texas A&M versus TCU. The desert lizard will be out to cause warts on R.C. Slocum's farmhands and give Pat Sullivan some momentum going into 1993. But I'm afraid they'll find out that A&M stands for ammunition and mutilation, and it's doubtful if Big Mo will follow the Frogs back to Fort Worth. Leonard's loser, TCU. California versus Stanford. Bill Walsh has got his flocks running on high-octane birdseed after a mid-season slump, and they'll be ready for a victory flight around the Bears Den in Berkeley when the final gun sounds on Saturday. But they should remember that the Golden Honey Dippers could recover also. Leonard's loser, California. UCLA versus Southern California. Larry Smith will have his horses ready to prance when he gets to Pasadena this week, and chances are they'll run circles around Terry Donohue's Bruins. But nothing is ever certain in this bloodletting except that this is the last time either group will play in the Rose Bowl this season. Leonard's loser, UCLA. Washington State versus Washington. Mike Price has put some strong teeth in his Cougars this year, and Don James knows that these cats can put a real hurting on his dogs if they ain't careful. Once your wheels start to come off, you're fair game for anybody, but I think the Huskies will have tightened up their lugs before they get to Pullman. Leonard's loser, Washington State. Arizona versus Arizona State. Showdown in the desert is at hand, and Dick Tomey will have his desert swarm ready to overrun the imps from Tempe before they can do much damage. Bruce Snyder may have other ideas about these Wildcat plans, but I don't think it'll do him much good. Leonard's loser, Arizona State. Missouri versus Kansas. Glenn Mason and his Blue Jays from Lawrence have had a fantastic year so far, and when they get to the Columbia Cat House, I don't foresee anything to ruin their season. The Tigers have already lost all the lives a cat's supposed to have, but maybe they can rustle up one more for this encounter. Leonard's loser, Missouri. Utah versus Brigham Young. The Pride from Provo will bring their Air Force to Salt Lake City to put on an aeronautical exhibition for the Utes and their followers, and Lavelle Edwards will drop an early load of bombs to get things started. He'll also drop a load later to finish up his show. Leonard's loser, Utah. San Diego State versus Fresno. Jim Sweeney will turn his Bulldogs loose in the Indian village next door to Mexico, and the canines will examine all the ancient history of the Aztecs. But while they're doing that, Al Luganbill and his current tribe will be removing their scalps. Leonard's loser, Fresno State. LSU versus Tulane. The Green Wave rolls up the Mississippi to the Tigers' Den in the Red Stick community, and they'll have their water guns ready to drown the Bengals. But this year, they won't have enough force to get the cats wet. Leonard's loser, Tulane. Here's Leonard's list of likely losers. Brown will lose to Columbia, Penn will lose to Cornell, Harvard loses to Yale, Princeton will lose to Dartmouth, Duke will lose to North Carolina, SMU will lose to Arkansas, Michigan State will lose to Illinois, Minnesota loses to Iowa, Northwestern will lose to Wisconsin, Purdue will lose to Indiana, Western Carolina will lose to Appalachian State, Furman will lose to Citadel, VMI will lose to Tennessee Chattanooga, Temple loses to Rutgers, Louisiana Tech will lose to West Virginia, East Carolina loses to Memphis State, Richmond will lose to William and Mary, Youngstown State will lose to Georgia Southern, Akron will lose to Cincinnati, Toledo loses to Northern Illinois, Oklahoma State will lose to Kansas State, Navy loses to Rice, Houston will lose to Texas Tech, Wyoming will lose to Hawaii, New Mexico will lose to Colorado State, Oregon State loses to Oregon, Arkansas State loses to Southwest Louisiana, North Texas State will lose to Northeast Louisiana, Bucknell loses to Colgate, Fordham will lose to Holy Cross, Boston U will lose to Northeastern, Towson State will lose to Delaware, Southwestern Missouri State will lose to Northern Iowa, Stephen F. Austin will lose to Northwest Louisiana, and Rhode Island will lose to Connecticut. Another load of smart pills has been distributed, and I'm slap worn out, so I'll just say, so long, neighbors. Get me out of here, Percy.